What happens when a joke about my husband's little problem turns into days of silence I never saw coming? Why did legal papers show up at my office when all I did was tease him a little in front of people? Can a wife still call herself the victim when the evidence comes out in public? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm standing here telling this story because I still don't understand how one small joke turned into my whole life falling apart. I thought I was being funny, light, playful. I teased my husband about his little problem in front of people who already thought he was too quiet, too serious. They laughed, I laughed, and for a moment I felt powerful. I didn't see the way he went still, or maybe I did and chose not to care. I told myself he'd get over it like he always did. He never liked conflict, never raised his voice. Silence was just his way of cooling off, or at least that's what I believed. But this time was different. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply stopped talking to me. Days of silence, distance, closed doors, and careful footsteps around the apartment. I kept telling myself he was overreacting, that he was trying to make me feel guilty, that he'd come around once I proved it was all harmless. I didn't know those quiet days were something else, something planned, deliberate, and final. Back then, I still thought I was the wronged one. I had no idea what was coming next. I woke up early that Saturday because the apartment felt too warm and the sunlight was hitting my face in a way that annoyed me. Elias had opened the curtains before leaving for his morning run. He always did that, even though I told him 100 times I like slow mornings. But he said sunlight helped me start the day with energy. Sometimes I wondered if he meant well, or if he liked controlling the room without asking. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and saw his mug cleaned and placed neatly upside down on the far end of the counter. He always washed his mug right after using it. I left mine from last night still half full. The two mugs looked like they lived in different houses, not the same home. The kitchen was quiet except for the fridge hum. I scrolled through my phone, pretending not to notice the sticky note on the wall that said paper drop 10:20. His handwriting. He never used reminders before. I told myself it was nothing, maybe something for work, though the time looked too exact. I tossed the note in the trash without reading it again. I didn't want small mysteries ruining my morning. Ivy texted me asking if brunch was still happening. I said yes. She sent a laughing emoji and asked if I was bringing the quiet one. That was her favorite name for Elias. I told her he might join later, but honestly, I didn't care if he did. He had been acting distant for days, giving me short answers, moving around the apartment like he was trying not to bump into me. I blamed the work stress he talked about last week, though part of me wondered if my little joke at dinner had bothered him more than he let on. But it was a harmless joke. Just one line. People laughed. That was the whole point. I got dressed, put on a soft blue dress, and took Mira to the neighbors for a play date. She hugged me quickly and ran off without looking back. Sometimes I felt guilty for feeling relieved when she wasn't in the house. Not because I didn't love her, but because being a mother made everything heavier. When Elias and I weren't getting along, she picked up on moods too easily. Brunch was at the small cafe near Ivy's apartment. The outdoor tables were crowded, and I liked that. Crowds made it easier to focus on myself. Ivy waved at me dramatically when she saw me. She had brought Drew, who was stirring his coffee like he wished he were anywhere else. Typical him. Ivy said I looked fresh, and I said she looked loud, and we laughed. She asked if Elias was annoyed about the joke. I shrugged and said he needed to learn to laugh at himself. She rolled her eyes and told me men always acted like the world ended when their ego got poked. I laughed harder than I should have because it felt good to have someone take my side without questions. When brunch ended, I walked home slowly. The sky was bright but not warm, and the wind made my hair move across my face. As I reached our building, I saw Elias's car parked crooked, like he had rushed inside. That was odd for him. He always parked perfectly. I went upstairs and found him in the living room, standing by the window. He didn't turn when I walked in. I said hi, and he said hi back, his voice flat. I told him brunch was fun. He nodded. I told him Ivy asked about him. He nodded again. I told him he should have come. He said he had errands. When I asked what errands, he said just things. I hated vague answers. I told him he could at least try to talk like an adult. He didn't respond. The silence annoyed me more than any argument could. I told him he was acting dramatic. He said he didn't want to fight. That made me angrier because I wasn't trying to fight. I was trying to make him admit he was being childish. I walked into the kitchen to grab water. The trash bin was open a little. The sticky note I threw away earlier wasn't there. I looked around. It wasn't on the counter either. I asked if he had taken it. He said he threw it in the shredder. I froze for a second because Elias never shredded anything. He said he was cleaning. I told him it was weird. He said cleaning wasn't weird. I almost replied something sharp, but he looked so calm it made me feel foolish, so I let it go. Later that afternoon, we had a family dinner planned at the big restaurant near the mall. His parents liked long tables and early reservations. I got ready, put on makeup, and waited near the door while Elias finished getting dressed. Mira was excited because she liked the chocolate cake there. When Elias finally came out, he looked tired but handsome in that quiet way he always had. I wanted to tell him that, but I didn't. I didn't want to look like I was apologizing for anything. At the restaurant, his parents were already seated. Lydia hugged Mira first and barely looked at me. That annoyed me too. I sat between Elias and Ivy, with Drew across from me. The table was filled with small talk until Ivy asked why Elias looked so serious. Before he could answer, I said maybe he was still embarrassed from last time. Then I added, "Don't worry, sweetie, we won't talk about your little trouble tonight." I said it lightly, like a silly joke. The table went quiet for 1 second, then Ivy laughed loudly. Drew smiled awkwardly. Lydia looked down at her napkin. Elias didn't move. He just stared at the table like he was reading something invisible. I thought maybe the joke landed wrong, so I added another comment, something about him being too sensitive. That made Ivy laugh again, but the rest of the table stayed stiff. Elias's father, Jonah, cleared his throat. He asked if everything was all right. I said everything was fine, just teasing. Elias slowly picked up his glass, drank water, and put it down without looking at anyone. The food arrived, and the tension faded just enough for people to start eating. I kept talking, trying to fill the space. I told Jonah about Mira's school project. I told Lydia about the new dress I bought. I told Ivy about a silly story from work. Elias barely spoke. He just nodded at things, keeping his voice low and short. When the plates were almost empty, he stood up quietly and said he needed fresh air. I watched him walk toward the exit. His phone lit up as he passed under a lamp. On the screen, before it locked, I saw a calendar reminder, Office Tower, 4:10 p.m. I stared at that for a moment. It bothered me, though I didn't know why. Maybe because he didn't tell me. Maybe because he suddenly had secrets. Or maybe because deep down I felt something shifting, something I didn't want to name. I told myself he'd come back in a few minutes, but he didn't, and the empty chair next to me made the whole table feel colder, like everyone could see cracks I refused to admit were there. I woke up Monday feeling tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Elias had taken the guest room again, leaving the master bedroom cold and too big. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before getting up. His side of the bed looked untouched. I told myself he was being dramatic, but the silence in the apartment made me feel like the one who had done something wrong, and I hated that feeling. I made coffee, even though I didn't want any, and left my mug half full on the counter. His mug, of course, was already washed and sitting upside down on the opposite end. 2 little corners of our marriage, living like divorced roommates. I told myself I didn't care. At work, the office felt brighter than usual, all that fake overhead lighting and people pretending they enjoyed Monday mornings. Rowan was already at his desk when I arrived. He nodded at me in that casual way that always felt like he was paying extra attention without looking obvious. I said good morning. He said I looked tired. I told him he noticed too much. He smiled in that half smile he used when he wanted me to read between lines. I didn't, of course, not openly, but something in me liked that he noticed anything at all. Elias barely looked at me these days. During the morning meeting, my manager talked about deadlines and new reports. I pretended to take notes. Really, I kept thinking about how Elias had walked out of the restaurant the other night without even looking back. It bothered me more than I expected. Not because he left, he'd done that before when we argued, but because of the way he handled it. No anger, no reaction, just calm quiet. I would rather he shouted at me than give me that stillness that felt like a wall I couldn't climb. After the meeting, I went to the break room. Rowan followed a minute later, pretending he came for water. He asked how my weekend went. I said it was fine. He asked if the quiet one was still upset. I laughed louder than necessary and told him not to worry about my marriage. He said he wasn't worried, just curious. I told him curiosity was dangerous. He shrugged like he didn't believe that at all. My phone buzzed with a message from Ivy. She asked if Elias and I had talked since dinner. I told her no, and added that he was probably sulking. She replied, "He's sensitive, Vess. Maybe tone it down." That annoyed me. I replied that teasing wasn't a crime. She sent a thumbs-up emoji that somehow felt like judgment. When lunch came, I didn't feel hungry, but I joined Rowan and 2 co-workers anyway. Sitting there with everyone chatting felt easier than going home to Elias's silence later. During the meal, one of my co-workers joked about husbands who can't take a joke. I felt all eyes shift toward me. I tried to smile like I didn't care. Someone asked me what Elias thought of the award ceremony last month. I made a joke about him being too shy for crowds and added something about him blushing easily. People laughed. It was harmless, I told myself. Harmless and true. But just as people laughed, a notification popped on my phone. It was from our shared calendar, automatically syncing from his phone. Meeting, personal, 3:45 p.m. No location, no details, no explanation. I stared at it for a moment too long. Rowan leaned closer and asked if everything was okay. I said yes, then locked my phone. But inside, I felt this strange mix of irritation and curiosity. I hated the idea of him doing something without telling me. He had always been predictable, steady, almost boring. But now he was doing things quietly, privately, and I didn't like that one bit. When I got home after work, Elias was in the kitchen washing dishes. He didn't look up when I walked in. I asked how his day was. He said it was fine. I asked if he had dinner plans. He said he already ate. That irritated me. Eating without me felt like a statement. A quiet, polite insult. I told him communication worked both ways. He nodded but didn't answer. The silence stretched until I broke it by telling him Rowan asked about him. I wanted some kind of reaction, even jealousy. Anything. He simply said, "Okay." I snapped. I said he was acting like a ghost, like someone who didn't even live here. He dried his hands and said he didn't want to argue. I hated when he used that line. It made me feel like the unbalanced one. I said, maybe if he acted like a normal husband, I wouldn't have to push things. He asked what pushing meant. I said nothing, because I didn't want to explain myself. Instead, I told him he needed to stop taking everything so seriously. He replied that some things mattered more than jokes. His calm tone made me feel small, so I pushed harder. I said something about how people laughed at my jokes because they understood humor. I said, maybe he should try being fun. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He simply picked up a folder labeled household from the counter and walked it to the guest room. He closed the door behind him. The sound of that door felt louder than any argument. I stood in the hallway, unsure why a simple folder bothered me so much. He'd never labeled anything before. He barely organized his socks, let alone papers. Later, I found Mira playing with her stuffed animals on the living room floor. She asked if Daddy was mad. I said no, Daddy was just stressed. She nodded like she wanted to believe me. She told me she made a card at school and wanted to show him, but she didn't know if he was busy. That made something twist in my stomach. I told her she could show him any time, but she shook her head and said he didn't smile much lately. After putting her to bed, I sat in the living room scrolling through my phone. I opened the shared calendar again. That meeting personal reminder blinked like it was waiting for me to notice it. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself he was planning something normal, maybe a car checkup, maybe a dentist appointment, but it didn't feel like that. Around 10, I heard the faint hum of the shredder from the guest room. It wasn't loud, but I recognized it. That sound made my chest tighten. I walked toward the door and knocked lightly. He didn't answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I opened the door without waiting. He was sitting at the small desk, staring at a blank page the printer had just pushed out. Another sheet sat nearby with a date written in the corner. He moved it quickly, but not fast enough. I asked what he was doing. He said he was sorting things. I asked what things. He said, just organizing. I told him it was unusual. He said routines change. I asked if he was upset with me. He said he didn't want to talk right now. I told him avoiding conversation didn't solve anything. He said silence sometimes protected people from saying things they shouldn't. I asked if that was aimed at me. He didn't answer. I felt heat rise in my face. I crossed my arms and told him I wasn't the bad guy. He didn't argue. He just said he was tired. That single line felt like dismissal. I left the room before I said something I couldn't take back. As I closed the door behind me, I heard his phone buzz. A thread name flashed briefly through the crack of light under the door. Follow-up. Not a friend, not work, something else entirely. I went to bed alone again, staring at the ceiling, wondering when things had shifted and how I somehow didn't notice until it was already too late. By Wednesday morning, the air in the apartment felt heavy, like the walls were listening. I woke up before my alarm because Elias opened the door to the master bedroom just enough to look inside. He didn't say good morning. He didn't even step in. He just checked whether I was awake and then closed the door again. The soft click felt colder than shouting. I sat up, annoyed that he wouldn't just talk like a normal person. I hated the way he made me feel, like some unwelcome guest in my own home. When I went to the kitchen, his mug was already washed and set on a completely different counter, far from where mine always sat. It was like he wanted to separate everything: dishes, rooms, habits. Distance made simple. I dressed quickly and left early, not because I had work to do, but because I didn't want to sit through another silent breakfast. On the way to the community center for the employee appreciation event, I replayed the night before. The door shutting behind him, the faint hum of the shredder again. The new file tabs lined up with colors he never used until now. Something in all that felt deliberate, but I didn't want to think about why. The community center was already buzzing with people when I arrived. Staff from all departments were wandering around, chatting near the refreshments table. A banner with our company name hung crooked over the stage, and the sound system hissed with feedback every few minutes. Crowded events always made me feel like I had a part to play. Like if I looked confident enough, everybody else would treat me like I was. Rowan waved me over as soon as he saw me. He looked good in the simple button-down he wore, and I liked that he noticed me instantly. He said I looked charged up, and I joked that someone had to bring energy because others were clearly unable to. He laughed. I enjoyed the easy way he reacted to me, without judgment or cold silence. We found seats close to the front. My manager gave a long speech about teamwork and dedication. I clapped at the right times, smiled at people I barely knew, and let myself imagine that Elias would notice how valued I was if he bothered to show up to anything like this. He never came to my work events. He always said he didn't want to get in the way, but sometimes I felt he just didn't want to see me shine. When the small award started, I got called up for outstanding coordination. People cheered politely. Rowan cheered loudly. I walked to the stage feeling good, maybe too good. Attention made everything feel easier. After I was handed the certificate, I made a quick little comment about how some people at home didn't believe I handled things well, but obviously my workplace did. The crowd laughed. I smiled larger than necessary. It felt like validation, even if the joke had a sharper edge than I intended. As I stepped off the stage, Rowan caught my arm lightly and said I killed it. I told him he was exaggerating. Another coworker joked that someone's husband must be proud. I rolled my eyes and said something like, if he even notices, and people laughed again. But their laughter felt different this time, too curious, too pointed. It didn't matter, I kept smiling. When the speeches ended, the music started, and people walked around in small clusters. The vibe loosened, people joked, and I felt myself lean into the attention. A few of us gathered near the back where the lights were dimmer. Someone brought up relationships again, and another person said I had the funniest stories about mine. I didn't correct them. I never corrected them. One woman asked if Elias ever came to these things. I told her no, he preferred staying home and thinking too much. She laughed. Someone else asked if he was the jealous type. I shook my head and made a small joke about him being shy in all areas. People laughed harder than I expected, and something about their reaction gave me a rush. I felt seen, admired. I didn't think about how the laughter might echo beyond that moment. As I was telling another story, this one about how he takes forever to react to anything, I noticed movement near the entrance. Elias. He walked in slowly, looking around like he wasn't sure he was in the right place. My stomach tightened. I didn't expect him to come. I didn't want him to hear anything. I didn't want him to hear everything. He spotted me and walked over. His face didn't show anger or hurt, just calm, too calm. I said he could have told me he was coming. He said he wanted to drop something off. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked around the group behind me. I tried to act casual. I said we were just talking. He nodded and said, I heard some of it. My face grew hot, but I tried to laugh it off. He didn't laugh. He handed me a small envelope. I asked what it was. He said it didn't matter right now, and I could look later. He turned to leave. I reached out and asked him to stay for the cake or something. He said he didn't want to interrupt. I told him he wasn't interrupting anything. He looked me in the eyes then and said, I know. Then he walked out. I stood there holding the envelope like it was heavier than paper should be. Rowan asked if everything was okay. I said yes, too quickly. I slipped the envelope into my bag and tried to shake the tension off. A few minutes later, a coworker raised their phone to record a group moment, and just as the camera lifted, I heard someone whisper, "Is that the husband she talks about?" I wasn't sure who said it. I only knew my heart squeezed in a strange way. I wasn't embarrassed. At least that's what I told myself. I was annoyed. People always made things bigger than they were. I stepped away from the group to breathe near the back doors. Just as I reached for my phone, it buzzed with a missed call notification. No caller ID. Then another alert. A calendar update synced from Elias's device. Another meeting personal. Same vague label. New date. New time. I closed the phone and stood there while the music played, feeling the strange pull of something shifting beneath my feet. But I brushed it off. I had work friends. I had attention. I had my stories. Elias would snap out of this. He always did. Or at least he used to. By Saturday morning, the apartment felt even quieter than usual. like sound itself didn't want to stay inside. Mira had a birthday party at a classmate's house, and I volunteered to take her because it meant getting out for a while. Elias stayed behind, saying he needed to sort a few things. That phrasing again. Always sorting now. Always organizing something that didn't need organizing. I told him he was acting like an old man with a filing hobby. He didn't laugh. He just nodded and said he'd pick Mira up later if needed. His voice stayed soft and careful, which made me feel like I was the one throwing knives. After dropping Mira off, I walked to the playground near Ivy's apartment. She had texted that she needed to vent about Drew forgetting their anniversary or something like that. I didn't care about the details, but I liked the idea of talking to someone who took my side on everything. When I got there, Ivy was already on the bench, sipping iced coffee like she owned the whole park. She looked me up and down and said I seemed stressed. I told her I wasn't stressed. I was just annoyed at Elias pretending to be some silent monk. She smirked and said he'd always been a little too gentle to handle someone like me. I rolled my eyes but didn't disagree. Ivy always exaggerated, but sometimes she was right. Elias could turn invisible when he wanted to avoid conflict. Lately, he seemed to vanish even when standing right in front of me. We talked a while about her problems first, Drew's forgetfulness, her boss being rude, some drama in her building. Then she asked how things were at home. I shrugged and told her I was done tiptoeing around Elias's mood. She said he'd get over it, men always did. I said he hadn't gotten over it yet. She laughed and said I probably needed to remind him who he married, whatever that meant. I leaned back and told her I'd been talking to Rowan more at work. Ivy raised an eyebrow and gave me that knowing smile she always pulled out when she wanted to stir trouble. She asked if Elias knew. I said it wasn't like that Rowan just understood me better than people who lived in silence. Ivy said understand was a flexible word. I rolled my eyes again, but she wasn't wrong. Then I made the mistake. I told her how Rowan said I looked good in blue yesterday and how he noticed my hair was different. Ivy laughed and said that sounded like flirting. I told her it wasn't a big deal. Then she asked how Rowan would know about that nickname Elias hated. The one I'd made during the award event. The one I used again later joking with co-workers. I froze for a second too long. Ivy caught it. She asked slowly, "Wait, you told Rowan that too?" And then, before I could stop myself, I added a detail he'd teased me about privately. A detail only someone I'd gotten too close to would know. Ivy's mouth fell open. She didn't yell or accuse. She just breathed out, "Vesper, have you been messing around with him?" I laughed like she was being dramatic, but it sounded thin even to me. She looked at me in a way I hated, like she was seeing something I hadn't planned to show. I said it wasn't a big deal, that Elias pushed me toward it with all his silence and sulking. Ivy shook her head and said I couldn't blame Elias for choices I made. I told her she sounded like one of those boring wives who never did anything spontaneous. She didn't laugh. Her tone softened in that patronizing way I couldn't stand. She said I needed to slow down before things got messy. I said things were already messy because Elias refused to talk. She told me that wasn't an excuse. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Kids ran across the playground, sunlight flickered through the trees, and I felt like the world was judging me through Ivy's eyes. I tried to shift the subject by suggesting we walk to the cafe down the street, but she said she needed to go. She stood and hugged me, but it felt different, lighter, cautious. I hated it. I told her not to act like I'd done something unforgivable. She said she wasn't judging, but her voice betrayed her. When she left, I sat alone for a while, watching strangers' kids play, while my stomach twisted with a strange mix of anger and worry. After about 20 minutes, I noticed a familiar car parked far on the other side of the street, Elias's. The angle was strange, half turned toward the exit, like he wanted to take off quickly. I didn't know how long it had been there. I didn't know if he'd seen me talking to Ivy, or if he'd overheard anything. The windows were dark, so I couldn't see inside. My chest tightened. I stood up and took a few steps toward it, but just then the engine started. The car pulled away slowly, turning the corner without speeding, without any sign he'd seen me at all. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I texted him asking why he was here. No reply. That made my mind race in circles I couldn't stop. I walked home instead of waiting for Mira's party to end, letting my thoughts spin. When I reached the apartment, the door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal except the faint smell of printer toner. It hung in the air like a memory. I walked into the hallway and noticed the door to the guest room slightly open. I pushed it slowly. Elias wasn't inside, but the desk lamp was on. Papers were stacked neatly in small piles. Colored tabs lined the edges. He'd never organized anything with that kind of precision. His laptop screen was dark, but a tiny light blinked on the printer. I stepped closer and saw a message on the monitor. File uploaded successfully. It was a CloudSync notification. My heart beat faster. I looked at the top sheet in one of the piles. It didn't say anything dramatic, just a date and a time, but the handwriting was careful, exact. I told myself he was just cataloguing receipts or doing taxes early. Something harmless, something normal. But the room felt wrong. Too clean, too deliberate, too full of quiet work he never used to do. When I heard the front door open again, I rushed out of the guest room so he wouldn't know I'd been inside. Elias walked past me without looking at my face. He set his keys down gently. I asked if he'd seen me at the playground. He said he was running errands. I asked which errands. He said the necessary kind. I hated the implication. I told him he should stop speaking in riddles. He said he wasn't. He walked toward Mira's room to check if she was back yet. I watched him move, so calm, so controlled. And for the first time since all this started, I felt a flicker of fear, real fear. Not because he was angry, but because he wasn't. The room felt colder as he walked away, and I stood there realizing I no longer understood what he was doing, or what he knew, or what he planned. And that terrified me more than any argument ever could. By the next evening, the tension in the apartment felt like something you could trip over. Even Mira seemed quieter, tiptoeing around us like she didn't want to disturb whatever strange mood had settled. I made pasta for dinner because it was the easiest thing, and I was too tired to pretend I cared about cooking anything more impressive. Elias came out of the guest room when I called him, but he didn't sit. He just stood at the counter, arms crossed loosely, as if he was waiting for something. I asked if he was going to join us. He said he already ate. That stung, even though I tried to act like it didn't. Mira asked him to taste a piece of garlic bread. He did, smiling softly for her. But he didn't sit down, and he didn't look at me. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need his attention, but inside I felt something sharp twist. It wasn't jealousy, it was something deeper, something like being erased. After I put Mira to bed, I found him in the living room, sorting through another pile of papers. I asked why he kept rearranging things. He said calmly that he was cleaning up. I told him no one cleans up this much. He didn't answer. I sat down across from him and asked if he was still mad about the joke. He said he wasn't mad. I hated that answer. It made me feel like my actions were beneath anger. I leaned forward, waited for him to look at me, and said he couldn't keep punishing me with silence. He replied that communication required safe ground. I asked what that meant. He said nothing. I felt the heat rising in my face. I told him he was pushing me away on purpose, making everything seem worse than it was. He finally looked up and asked, "What exactly is it you think this is?" His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't harsh. It was too level, too steady. I didn't know how to answer. I told him we hadn't been close lately because he kept shutting down. I said everyone needed affection, needed attention. I said he never gave me either anymore. He nodded slightly, like he was agreeing with something I didn't say. Then he asked if that was why I spent so much time with Rowan. His tone stayed controlled, but the question hit me so hard I forgot how to breathe for a second. I told him Rowan was just a co-worker. He said I repeated that phrase too often for it to stay simple. I snapped that, if he actually acted like a husband, maybe I wouldn't need anyone to listen to me elsewhere. He just nodded again, like he was adding something to an invisible list. I hated that nod more than I hated any argument we'd ever had. He gathered the papers into a straight pile. His movements were slow, deliberate. Then he stood. I asked where he was going. He said he needed to get a few things ready. I demanded he stop being vague. He said, still calm, that sometimes clarity took time. I threw my hands up and told him he was acting like a stranger. He said quietly, "I've been trying not to." I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't want to. I followed him to the hallway, asking if this was all really about a joke, if he was truly that sensitive. He turned to me then, finally facing me fully for the first time in days. His eyes were steady, tired, and too calm. He said, "It stopped being about a joke the moment you chose someone else to hear you." I opened my mouth to deny it, but nothing came out. I wasn't ready for that line, for that level of certainty. He didn't shout or accuse. He didn't ask questions. He didn't list evidence. He just said the truth like it was a simple observation. I told him he was twisting things, making something out of nothing. He didn't argue. He just watched me in a way that made me feel like he was no longer seeing the version of me I tried to present. I said it wasn't my fault he shut down emotionally. I said he made me feel alone. I said I needed someone, anyone. He let me finish all of that before speaking again. He said, "I hear you." That was it. Nothing more. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't agreement. It was acknowledgement, the kind you give a stranger at a bus stop. He reached for the drawer under the console table. It was the drawer that used to hold random things, mail, pens, receipts. But now it clicked when he pulled it open. There was a small lock installed. I hadn't noticed that before. He placed a slim notebook inside and locked the drawer again. I asked what he was keeping in there. He said, "Just what I need." I told him I deserved to know. He said, "You will. When it's time." His voice didn't rise, but something about it chilled me. He stepped past me to head toward the guest room. I followed him again, because the idea of letting this end without answers felt impossible. I asked if he was leaving. He said he wasn't. I asked if he still loved me. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Love and choices are not the same thing." I wanted to scream at him, but the words tangled in my throat. I stood in the doorway as he sat at the desk. He opened another folder with neat tabs, yellow, green, blue. He wrote something in the notebook and placed a single USB beside it. The USB had only a date on the label. No name, no title, just the date. I asked him what that was. He didn't look up. He simply said, "Everything will be handled properly." No anger, no threat, just a fact, like announcing the weather. My breath caught. Something in his tone made my stomach knot. I told him he was scaring me. He said he didn't want to scare me. I said it felt like he already knew what he wanted to do. He said, "I do." He stood, closed the folder, and walked past me again. I stepped aside without meaning to, like my body responded before my mind did. He paused halfway down the hall. For a second, I thought he might turn around and say something human, something warm, something that told me this wasn't as bad as it felt. But he only said, "Go rest, Vesper. I'll take care of the rest." I stood there long after he disappeared into the guest room, feeling like the whole apartment had shifted, like the ground beneath me wasn't stable. For the first time, I realized I didn't know what properly meant coming from him. And I didn't know if I wanted to. I went to bed with the lights off, lying on the far side of the mattress, staring into the dark. Every small sound in the apartment felt amplified. The soft hum of the printer, the drawer clicking shut, the careful footsteps. All night I couldn't shake the feeling that Elias wasn't preparing to argue with me. He was preparing for something else entirely. The next morning, the sky looked too bright for how heavy my chest felt. I barely slept. Elias had moved around the apartment quietly, like he was trying not to wake a stranger. When I walked into the kitchen, his mug was already washed and gone. Mine sat where I left it. I hated how symbolic it all looked, like two separate lives in the same room. Mira was with his parents for the morning. I told myself that was normal, that nothing was happening, that I could still fix this if I just said the right thing. Elias didn't come out of the guest room until I was already dressed for work. He walked past me, tying the knot of his tie with calm hands. I asked if we could talk later. He said, "Yes, we'll talk today." That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. His tone wasn't warm. It wasn't angry. It was settled. I drove to the office feeling like I was trapped in a car with my own heartbeat. When I parked and stepped into the lobby, I saw him. Elias, standing near the elevators, hands in his pockets, looking almost out of place in the building where I worked. I tried to smile, tried to walk up like nothing was wrong, but before I reached him, a man stepped toward me. He wasn't security. He wasn't a coworker. He held a folder. He asked my name. I said yes. He handed me the papers. My mouth went dry. I asked what this was. He said it plainly, gently, almost sorry. "You're being served." I froze. Right there, in the middle of the lobby, where people were walking in with coffee cups and laptops, and conversations that had nothing to do with my life breaking apart. I heard the sound of someone whispering behind me. I heard Rowan's voice somewhere near the security desk saying my name quietly, like he didn't know if he should come closer. I looked at the top page. My vision blurred, but the words still burned through. Petition for dissolution of marriage, temporary financial orders, temporary possession, schedule. My heart hammered against my ribs. I flipped to the next page before I could stop myself. There were summaries, dates, times, screenshots printed in small boxes, my messages with Rowan, the nights I came home late, the comments I made in public, not word for word but close enough, transcribed, logged, catalogued. Someone gasped behind me, maybe a coworker. I didn't look. I turned toward Elias, waiting for some sign that this was a mistake, that he didn't mean it, that he just wanted to scare me. But his face was calm, steady, unbearably still. I asked him why he did this. He said he didn't want to fight anymore. I told him we could fix things, that this wasn't necessary. He said, "Everything is already in motion." I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not sadness, not yet, but shock. I said he didn't even give me a chance. He said I'd had many. His voice didn't crack. It didn't even waver. He said he hoped this would make things clearer for both of us. Clearer, like this was some kind of favor. I said he blindsided me. He shook his head. He said, "No, you just didn't want to look." The lobby felt too big, too bright, too loud. People were watching but pretending not to. Rowan stepped back into the crowd, face pale. Elias turned, nodding politely at someone who held the elevator open for him. He didn't look back at me. I held the papers tight because my hands were shaking. I tried to call his name, but my voice got stuck in my throat. He stepped inside the elevator. The doors started to close. For a second, I saw him standing there, calm as if this were just another task on his list. Then the door shut, and he was gone.